Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this session. My name's Kat Frame, and I'm from the University of Melbourne. This year, I'm the co-chair of the CRIG Seminar Committee with Romney Adams from Monash University. And I'd like to welcome everyone to this first event of the CRIG Seminar of 2021, hosted by Caval and the Seminar Committee. On behalf of Caval and the committee, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands across Australia where we live, learn and work. We acknowledge and celebrate the inherent strengths of Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and other First Nations peoples and communities, and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters, sky and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to welcome and extend my respects to First Nations people attending today. I'm joining you from Wurundjeri country, and I encourage you to share which country you are attending from in chat. Today, if you have any technical questions during the webinar, please type your question into chat and the Caval team will assist you. In developing the seminar theme, the organising committee reflected on our shared experiences of the uncertainties of the pandemic, navigating the ongoing work from home arrangements, and the shift within our libraries to offering fully online services. We could also see that emerging alongside this were new models for working together, collaborating, and problem solving. Across our three event program, we are sharing examples of creativity and innovation, many of which have been sparked by the disruption we've all experienced over the last 21 months. Other clear drivers are our adaptability and strength and our commitment to find creative solutions to resolve difficult problems, as well as develop new high quality services for our academic communities. Within the program, we have included examples of projects that are richer because of the new ways of communicating and ideas that have sprung from necessity. The committee was impressed by the quality and diversity of the EOIs we received, and we hope you will be inspired by the many examples of colleagues innovating. Today's program focuses on library initiatives through global, community and local lenses. So to introduce the program, today for this CRIG Seminar event, we are starting off with a presentation by invited speaker pair, Carmel O'Sullivan, Director, Library Services, and Lyndall Gunton, Manager, Open Knowledge Initiatives from the University of Southern Queensland. They will speak about using the UN Sustainable Development Goals to contextualise the impact of library services. Their former colleague, Claire Thorpe, Director of Library Services at Southern Cross University, will facilitate a Q&A after the presentation. Then, after a short break, we will be joined by three teams from Caval institutions for inspiration talks. We will hear from Anna Finlay, Senior Library Learning Advisor at La Trobe University, with a talk, Just to Ask, Small Questions with Big Impact, followed by Apples, Oranges, and a Bookshelf Online, using H5P to make a library collection accessible to children at the Little Food Festival Library, presented by Tracy White and Sam Helfrich, liaison librarians from Monash University. The session then concludes with a presentation from Deakin University's Health Liaison Librarians, Lisa Gribben, Louisa Shear and Rachel West, on helping out, pivoting academic preparation and support for teaching. Each of the inspiration talks will be followed by a 5-minute Q&A facilitated by Joe Gillespie from RMIT University. Today, we will be using Slido as a means of facilitating the Q&As, so please ask your questions through the Slido link, which has been added to the chat. Alternatively, you can go to slido.com or the Slido app and use the event code #442987. In Slido, you can also like other people's questions to vote them up on the list. In order to remain within the time we've allocated for this event, we'll be using a sound to provide a reminder to the speakers that there are 2 minutes remaining for their presentations and then the subsequent Q&A. Kat Kane, can you please demonstrate the timekeeping sound for us? I'm not hearing that from Kat. Hopefully it'll work as we go along. Okay. Now it's time for me to introduce Lyndall and Carmel. USQ Library are trailblazers in highlighting the value and contribution the library makes to using the Sustainable Development Goals. Through a narrative approach, they provide evidence and share the impact the library makes to empower students, researchers, and the community. We are excited to be able to share their presentation about their approach to storytelling and their focus on how they're contributing to the priority areas such as quality education, poverty, inclusion and diversity, and inclusion and environmental sustainability. I'll now hand over to Lyndall and Carmel. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction, Kat. And thank you, Lyndall, for sharing the slides for us. So our presentation today is about USQ's adventures with the UN SDGs. Lyndall and I would like to also acknowledge the traditional owners of the different lands on which we all gather. I'm on Guyable land today in Queensland. We would also like to pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, remembering that all of these places on which we are meeting today have always been places of teaching, learning and research. Today, Lyndall and I will discuss why USQ Library took on this activity and how we went about it. Lyndall will share a couple of examples. We'll look critically at the outcomes of this endeavour and what we plan to do next. And we'll be focusing especially on our two takeaways. Firstly, that mapping your library's activities to the UN Sustainable Development Goals doesn't have to be complicated or complex. And second, that these kind of initiatives come about perhaps more easily when a culture of evidence-based practice is established and cultivated, and when time and space is given to exploring and experimenting. So first, to situate USQ, we are a multi-campus regional university located in southeast Queensland, Australia. We've been providing higher education for just over 50 years, and we've been a university for a little over 25 years. We started in the regional town of Toowoomba as a local initiative to provide opportunities for young people from the region and further west, and have since grown to have an identity that is firmly rooted in place. Southeast Queensland, the growing demographic in the corridor west of Brisbane, as well as the more rural and remote areas to our west. Toowoomba is perched on the top of the Great Dividing Range. It's a beautiful city and you should visit. And that dividing range is sometimes spoken about as another kind of division, a division between decent internet access and poorer internet access, between aspiration for higher education and a lack of sense of belonging at university. USQ is very much focused on changing that aspiration and bringing opportunity and optimism to the regions. From its inception, USQ and its predecessors were expert in distance and then online education. So as an example of the type of cohort that USQ has, I remember I grew up on a farm on the Darling Downs, and I remember my mother going back to university after she had multiple children and doing that by distance from what was then the DDIAE, and she could manage running a farm, raising children and doing study by night and by distance from what was the predecessor of USQ. USQ has a student cohort of more than 27,000 undergrad students across a range of disciplines, including education, health, business, engineering, media, creative arts and sciences. USQ is also one of the largest providers of higher education to incarcerated students across the country. We have a large cohort of students who are the first in their family to study at university, and we have a large cohort of mature age students. So this again emphasises that as an institution, USQ is about giving people who might face various barriers to higher education the opportunity to reach their potential. With more than 75% of USQ students studying online before 2020, we were perhaps better equipped than some to take on the challenges of studying during COVID-19, and we have seen a further uptake of flexible study options by USQ students. And the fact that we didn't have any kind of shutdown of teaching periods in order to scale up to online teaching, where other universities did have to take a little pause and get ready for online, is probably another little piece of evidence that it wasn't a huge shock to either our staff or students to change that mode of study. So let's now, next slide, Lyndall, thank you. Let's talk a little bit about what makes USQ Library tick. So like others, we partner with academics to embed learning activities that develop academic, digital and information literacies into curriculum and to develop these skills beside the curriculum, understanding that these skills and a sense of self-efficacy underpin successful learning outcomes, and we scaffold these across study programs to provide graduates with quality preparation for work and career progression. We are comfortable in the online space, delivering very successful online workshops and drop-in sessions for students who in turn are also used to online delivery. We happily experiment with different times for these sessions in order to best meet the needs of students. And what we aim for is a supportive, connected and intuitive experience for our students, no matter what their mode of study. You might also be aware that USQ is very active in open education practice, publishing open textbooks via the Pressbooks platform, including one that you'll hear about from Lyndall very shortly. USQ Library currently employs 72 staff across 3 USQ campuses, and with the creation of the evidence-based practice coordinator role in late 2016, filled in 2017, USQ Library has worked to cultivate an evidence-based mindset in relation to decision-making, demonstrating library impact and service improvement. And this is accompanied by a philosophy of staff development focusing on play, purpose and potential. So what are the UN SDGs or Sustainable Development Goals, and why are libraries interested in them? So the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development identifies 17 goals as a shared blueprint for peace, prosperity, people and the planet. And within each of these goals, there are a number of targets. And the reason that we're interested in the goals is really because the UN SDGs have at their heart an aim to ensure that all human beings can fulfill their potential in dignity and equality and in a healthy environment. And this really aligns very beautifully with USQ Library's aim to enable students to develop the confidence, resilience and skills to reach their potential as engaged, informed and productive citizens, and for staff to access the tools, supports and systems to reach their potential as world-class teachers, researchers and professionals. So libraries of all types are about supporting people to reach their potential, as are the UN SDGs. The SDGs can be used by university libraries as a benchmarking tool and as a way to challenge ourselves around the sorts of targets, frameworks and KPIs that we use to communicate value and impact, both internally to our own staff and to others. So there were a number of aims for this activity. So one aim was to situate our experience and activities and plans within this very global context that wasn't really written for or necessarily about libraries, but where we could find many points of relevance. The UN SDGs gave us a different lens to look through and a framework in which our libraries activities that might be more difficult to quantify and measure could be valued. Another aim was around evidence-based practice. We really wanted to use this exercise as an educational tool with library staff to show how we could use that approach to gather evidence and communicate our impact. And by sharing the outcomes, we were also giving back to the profession, which again is part of the ethos of evidence-based practice. And hopefully we're doing that today. So we hoped that the exercise would be a catalyst for us to identify opportunities for innovation and further improvement, but also to take stock, acknowledge and celebrate our efforts and achievements. So over to you, Lyndall.
Thanks, Carmel. So In 2019, the Call, Value and Impact group held a discussion about whether libraries were using the SDGs as a tool or a framework for reporting or demonstrating impact. We thought it was an interesting exercise to compare our goals to the SDGs to see where we were tracking and how relevant the goals were to our outcomes. We took a proof of concept approach to determine whether it was possible to map the library's activities to the SDGs. As the then acting coordinator for evidence-based practice, I worked with the then Associate Director for Library Experience, Claire Thorpe, to map the library's action goals and activities to the UN SDGs. During the year, we looked at the interim outcomes and the end of year outcomes to see what progress we had made. We recognised that the activity could be a practical application of evidence-based practice through which staff could begin to measure and self or peer assess their work against an existing framework. It became clear that the results generated could be a means of demonstrating the value and impact of the library to the wider university leadership and the community. As we progressed through the exercise, we realised we needed a means to communicate this to the wider library and beyond. I looked at other examples of how the other libraries had been already reporting on activities and outcomes using the UN SDGs as a framework. The 2019 Call report on UN SDGs was a useful example of how to demonstrate the impact of activities across Australian academic libraries through storytelling. I drew on this example and consulted with library managers, identified key examples for each of the relevant SDGs and sourced appropriate data to incorporate into the document. The 2019 report was then presented as a Microsoft Sway. And this was then shared by senior library leadership with our Pro Vice Chancellor Education. During 2020, we admittedly didn't spend time much further developing this process. Like others, we were focused on ways we could continue to provide a quality library experience during COVID for university students and staff, as well as supporting library staff to work remotely. However, as 2020 drew to a close, and Queensland was fortunate enough to experience an easing of COVID cases, and the university began to turn its attention to what the new normal might look like, we took the opportunity to reflect on the year again and look to the UN SDGs as a framework in which to do this. We tracked our progress and final outcomes and identified other initiatives and activities that emerged during the challenges faced as a result of the COVID pandemic. The 2020 version was then made available through the USQ Pressbooks platform. Our approach has been an experimental one, to try things and embrace a culture of learning and give people the opportunity to come up with ideas and try new ways of collecting and sharing evidence. It is a safe learning culture and evidence-based mindset that provides a space in which to be creative and reflective. This approach has evolved and will continue to do so. Our approach has relied on the role of the coordinator evidence-based practice, who is charged with, and I'm using a quote here from the 2021 article by Claire Thorpe and Elisa Howlett, charged with developing deep understandings of business and client needs, supporting a culture of continuous service improvement, promoting robust decision-making, and demonstrating value to clients and stakeholders. So how did we go about this? Our initial approach aligns quite closely with the first two steps in the 2017 model from the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. Step one, to map what you already do. And step two, build internal capacity and ownership of the SDGs. But within this, we adopted a reflective practice approach. And you knew I'd have to include a slide with an image of somewhere in Queensland. This is a photo of USQ's Japanese gardens, which are located at our Toowoomba campus. The reflection of the gardens in the lake is something to behold. So we started out by asking, what's your gut feeling about which goals are most relevant to the activities we already do? When we initially began this exercise in 2019, we conducted desktop assessments and self-identification. We gathered evidence through inference and observation to provide a clear description of library projects and activities and their importance to the SDGs. As the coordinator of evidence-based practice, I facilitated conversations with the 12 members of the library leadership team. These conversations helped to map our existing business as usual activities, project outcomes, and annual performance targets that related to the goals. Mapping was conducted at the macro level, focusing on the 17 goals rather than the 169 targets. The activity began in April 2019 with a progress update circulated for feedback in June. And the final reporting concluded in December 2019 and was shared with them through the Microsoft Sway. So having done this previously and invested the time and effort in sharing this work across the library, for the 2020 version, we knew we could take the next step of bringing in and highlighting the voices of staff from across the library as the narrators of those stories about the activities and outcomes that were part of 2020. While we engaged again in the desktop mapping exercise, we complemented this with an invitation to library staff to reflect on their work and how it relates to the SDGs. Our then coordinator of evidence-based practice, Elisa Howlett, developed a storytelling template that was shared with library staff who were encouraged to share the structure, use the structure to write their story. Some staff did this as an individual task, others took the initiative to work collaboratively. While some offered to do this, as we compiled content, we also identified gaps and then approached library staff to request that they contribute by writing the story about a specific activity or project. This required a relatively low level of commitment, making it easy for staff to contribute. We explored ways to communicate this internally and to share more broadly. For sharing the 2020 version, we turned to the Pressbooks platform because we already use it. It is openly and freely accessible for users. It further demonstrates our commitment to making our content open and Creative Commons licensed. It is easy to include links and content in formats other than print, and it would be another means of drawing attention to our full catalogue of open text. We were fortunate to be able to access the expertise of the USQ Library Open Education Practice team to assist with this. Finally, we reflected on the process as a whole to consider what this tells us about what we value, what we are good at, and what we might want to do more of. This is ongoing, and we'll discuss this a little bit more in a bit. But I'll take a few minutes here to use 3 of the goals as examples of how we went about this. So one of the ways in which USQ Library has contributed to Goal 4, quality education, is through the Online Study Support Program. Online Study Support is a USQ Library activity that provides intentional learning, online learning opportunities across the year, incorporating teacher presence and facilitating social engagement. The program demonstrates best practice guidelines for online learning by offering a variety of academic, maths, and study topics each week. The learning environment promotes belonging and connectedness between students and staff by meeting students in the space where they are. Learning advisors Dr. Eddie Sangavellu and Kate Derrington are 2 of the library staff who deliver these sessions. They wrote the story for Online Study Support and explained how the program expanded during 2020 and COVID, providing additional opportunities for students to connect with library services and other students. The service incorporated additional sessions to help students navigate alternative assessment types during COVID. Positive feedback and the significant rise in attendance has seen the program gain traction, and it continues to grow as an avenue of support for students by enhancing the learning experience. The reflection on attendance data and student feedback for this exercise continues to shape the program. One of the ways in which USQ Library has contributed to Goal 8, decent work and economic growth, is through employment for students as assistant library officers. USQ Library takes a proactive role in contributing to practical and meaningful employment opportunities for students. In 2020, USQ Library employed 11 students as assistant library officers across our 3 campus libraries. USQ Library seeks to provide meaningful work experiences that provide opportunities for employees to experience how the library profession operates and explore options for career progression as a result of study. 2 ALOs also commenced study to become qualified as library professionals following their positive experience. More have commenced study in 2021. As part of this exercise, I wrote the story after consulting with the client support team leaders, the Associate Director for Library Experience, and the ALOs themselves to understand their experience of working, particularly during COVID, with USQ Library. And our third example is one of the ways in which USQ Library has contributed to Goal 1, ending poverty, by using e-text and open text to transform student learning online during COVID. This was underpinned by a human-centered approach to providing access to study materials during COVID. USQ's physical collections were closed on 25th of March 2020 to limit the spread of COVID-19. The library clearly communicated to the USQ community the move to operating exclusively online while campus libraries were temporarily closed. An immediate and pressing challenge was to ensure that accessibility to textbooks was maintained over this time. There was a need to communicate with stakeholders, advocate for access, and make informed decisions based on analytics and knowledge of licensing and copyright allowances. In a climate where students were experiencing a heightened sense of stress and uncertainty, these strategies sought to relieve some financial burdens associated with purchasing textbooks and access to other study resources and information sources. Student and staff feedback indicated there was much appreciation for this increased interim availability of information. The Associate Director Content collaborated with the Open Education Practice Manager, Content Acquisitions Manager, and the Liaison Librarians to piece together the story of how this evolved and what unfolded. This reflective practice has fueled our commitment to progressing this in 2021, which has seen a further uptake of open texts as course readings and funding opportunities to adapt and create open text and open education resources to embed into USQ courses. One example of this is the adaptation of a text to create Academic Success, a library staff authored open access publication designed to help students on their university journey. There were a number of outcomes associated with adopting the UN SDGs as a framework for reporting our library activities and demonstrating our impact. These were on individual, team, and organisational levels. We found that existing services, collections, and projects correlated to 8 of the 17 SDGs. Activities were mapped to these goals and reported to senior executive of the university. As an exercise, the high-level mapping activity and reporting was an educative and awareness-raising opportunity, initially focused only on library staff. It introduced staff to the SDGs' relevance to the university and academic library context. Library staff became more aware of the cultural and social implications of their role. It provided library staff with evidence-based ways in which to see themselves and where their work makes a meaningful impact on others. It enabled staff to identify where their personal and professional values intersect with the SDGs. And as a result, some library teams and individual staff aligned their own 2020 professional goals with the SDGs. Collaborative reflection and contribution has given rise to suggestions for improvement, identification of gaps to address, and focusing of priorities as ways to support the goals in the future. Using Pressbooks has provided us with access to analytics about the publication. And since it was published in June 2021, it has been viewed more than 800 times. We're also able to know which chapters are most popular, how users access it, what format they download it in, and where users are accessing it from around the world. The communication strategy led to conversations that increased university leaders' awareness of the SDGs, as well as the value and impact of USQ Library in improving information access and the library's role in transforming the lives of USQ students and community. USQ Library has been able to demonstrate how our knowledge and information infrastructures enable student achievement and research excellence. This work has provided an opportunity for USQ Library to engage more broadly across the Australian academic library sector and the international library profession. Library staff have published journal articles and papers, presented at conferences, and contributed to sector-wide reports about this topic, and we look forward to continuing to do so. Back to you, Carmen.
So what's next? Thank you, Lyndall. So what we'd like to do is have a third go at mapping our activities against the UN SDGs and with the aim of iteratively doing better. Equally, we want to be brave enough to look at what we've done so far and be happy to put things aside if we reflect that this no longer suits us or didn't have the impact we desired. We're happy to do things differently without viewing this as a failure. And if in the future we decide not to do any activity relating to the SDGs, then we're also comfortable to make that decision. So one area we have already identified to improve is to make more visible the voices and experiences of students. So we're really looking forward to strengthening that aspect of the work. And a second area where we haven't yet had the impact we hoped for is socialising this with the university leadership and having them put a bit more value on our contribution in this area. So we think there is more we can do there and that we could be seen as role models within the university for our approach. And what do we see happening in the future? So responding to the goals has allowed us to consider how the activity around each of the goals that we benchmark against aligns with our values. It crystallises our thinking around that goal and within the framework, and it allows us to see more clearly what our next steps as a library might be. I think that the work around the SDGs is very validating for any library. It confirms our values and goals, and in our case, as I'm sure it would be in most cases, it aligns also with the university's values. And we will continue to participate in the core work of documenting and planning how academic libraries contribute to the SDGs, and we'd also like to explore how our work connects with the ALIA strategic planning around the UN SDGs as well. So our final message is 2 takeaways. Firstly, this kind of activity doesn't have to be complex or complicated. You don't need a very sophisticated plan up front. You can just give it a go. And we'd secondly like to give a plug for the role of evidence-based practice. We think that these kinds of initiatives do come about more easily when there's an established culture of evidence-based practice, which has been deliberately cultivated, and when time and space is given to exploring and experimenting without fear of failure. So we do have a list of references that will be available when the slides are shared. And finally, I'd like to thank the many current and former USQ library staff who have contributed to this work, including Claire Thorpe, who is with us today and who will be helping to facilitate the questions and answers after the presentation. So thank you.
Thank you, Carmel and Lyndall, for your presentation. We've got quite a few questions coming in on the Slido, but there still is time if you would like to add your question. So I'm just going to jump straight into them. The first question I'd like to ask relates to a comment you made earlier in your presentation, Carmel, about measuring what matters and measuring things that can't be measured in other ways. The question is, how different is the evidence gathered from measuring against the SDGs from what is traditionally measured in libraries, and is there an overlap?
I would hope there would be an overlap, but it is more narrative in focus. So probably libraries are keen sometimes on collecting a lot of stats and not necessarily stories so much, but I'm sure that that is changing over time. But so it's probably that more narrative aspect of collecting examples, and that's not something that we should ignore in other ways that we collect our evidence. Sometimes though, I think people in university leadership like a good graph, and we'd like to change what they're used to seeing from us.
We've had a couple of questions come in that relate to the culture of evidence-based practice at USQ, so we might focus on those next. The first one is around, I guess, the history of the role, and what approach did you take, Carmel, when advocating for that evidence-based role back in 2016?
In 2016, we were doing a very large organisational change. It was kind of one of those big shifts in the history of the library, and the PVC Scholarly Information and Learning Services, I think it was called, at the time was Helen Partridge, who you may be aware of. So it wasn't very hard to sell evidence-based practice coordinator to Helen, and it was just an opportunity to say, where do we want to go? What would give us that boost to change how staff see themselves engaged every day in contributing to how the library works and reflecting on the efficacy or the opportunities for improvement and the real world impact of what they do. So it was a really key role, and it might be a transitional role. We've had it, you know, now for a number of years. And one of the focuses of that role is to help every library staff member develop an evidence-based mindset. And I think we've been very successful in that area.
So to follow up from that is, how has the culture of reflective and evidence-based practice changed in the workplace culture over the last 5 years?
I think that it's partly that you do see staff at all levels thinking about the evidence that they might need to suggest something, to suggest a change, or thinking about what the evidence of what they do now says about what they might do in the future. So I think it is that every staff member, I think, feels more empowered to suggest an improvement because they've got this evidence-based kind of toolkit behind a suggestion for improvement. And also, I think it is a little bit connected to a culture where it's okay to try something and have it not work. Because of that evidence-based approach, you are just saying, I think this might work, this is how I might judge whether or not it works, and then I do have something objective to say, well, actually didn't do what I thought it would do, and that's okay. So I think it is just trying to get it filtered down to every person in the library having an impact and being able to understand the evidence around what they do every day.
And I guess one last follow-up question on this theme is, which I think you've answered, but we'll ask it anyway because it's the most popular question at the moment, is what has fostered creativity at USQ to give rise to activities like this?
I think we made a number of changes in that big organisational change. So part of it, I think, is just communication, a broad leadership team. You know, out of 72 staff, we've got about 12 on a leadership team. That's a pretty big proportion, probably. More transparent communication, having that one role dedicated who's going around talking to all the different teams and helping them understand the evidence about what they do now and what they might want to do in the future. So I think it's just a lot of effort around communication, learning, safe to fail, and also getting rid of that gut instinct where people say no to something because they just have a feeling that it won't work. And often that's based on a lot of bias or a lot of lack of exposure to current readings or whatever it might be. And when you have this clear evidence-based practice approach, you have less of that, oh no, we're not going to do that because I know that won't work. And so that gives people more opportunity to actually try things.
Okay. Lyndall, a couple of questions for you around the publication of the press book. So what support did you have in place to produce the book? What structures? Was there any editorial support?
We were really fortunate. First of all, we had the Pressbooks platform already. As many know, we use that to host and publish our open texts on it. So we had that already available to us. But in addition to that, we have a team in the library who are experts both at using that platform and teaching other people to use it, but as well working with authors to publish in that space and use some of the really fantastic functionality in that. And so I was very fortunate to have at my fingertips some people who could answer all the questions and teach me how to use that tool. So this was a real opportunity for me to enhance my digital literacy skills. I did have to work, of course, as you can see in the publication, with a wide range of authors, but the use of the storytelling template really cut down on the work that I had to do to edit those stories, because they all came through in a very similar structure, a similar writing style, and then all I did was work with them to add in images or additional links or additional examples or data where we thought that would be helpful.
And you've iterated, I guess, through two different types of presentation style, from the sway last year and then the press book this year. Have you considered what the next iteration might look like? Are you potentially considering audiovisual materials or other formats?
That's an interesting question. That's something that we will be in talks with the coordinator of evidence-based practice and hopefully Carmel about what that next iteration might be like. But as Carmel mentioned, one of the things we're really focused on is bringing through those student voices. We worked hard to map the SDGs, we worked hard to bring in the staff voice, and now we see the need to also introduce and include the student voice in that. So I think different formats, because US Pressbooks does facilitate that, different formats will really help in terms of engagement. So that's a great idea.
So there is a question about the student voice, and I know you had some quotes on the screen, so maybe if you could tell us where those quotes came from. But I guess the question would be, if you're looking to incorporate the student voice or even the academic staff voice, is this something that you think you need an ethics application for going forward?
Our understanding of the quotes that we had were given with consent to use for this situation. But I think that if we were to take the next step and do some further research in this, that may be something that we could consider. The purpose of gaining that information and that feedback was to improve our service provision, inform our decision making. So at this point, aside from getting specific permission to consent to use for this event, we haven't gone down the ethics track. That's a big commitment, as a lot of people would know. It involves a lot of extra work. So that would be something that we'd have to take serious consideration on.
So I want to move away from the mechanics of this activity and now, I guess, delve a little bit more into the experience of engaging and making staff aware of the SDGs and their value. And there's a great question here. Did work-life wellbeing improve with introducing the values through the SDGs? Because these, and I guess the implication is because they aligned with staff's personal values. Did you see a change in the way that staff engaged with the SDGs when they understood how those values aligned in their work and their wellbeing?
I think that might be a big leap to make, that participating in this activity would have tangibly improved work-life balance. I think it's probably just one other, one other brick in the wall, probably a terrible analogy, where you're validating staff. And I don't think one activity can really do that, but if it's part of a broader culture that is all cohesive and not contradictory, because I think you could do this activity and it not really align with the way that you treat people elsewhere in their work lives. So I wouldn't like to make that assumption that one activity had a tangible change to work-life balance, but I hope that it demonstrates to staff that what we value and how we value them, and it aligns with the way that we behave in the rest of our working lives.
And what it's also done is prompted conversations among individuals with teams about where those alignments are, and I think that's a good thing that we can continue to encourage.
So Carmel, question here probably for you. Do the SDGs shape any other roles in the library apart from the evidence-based coordinator role? Have you built them into performance indicators or position descriptions, for example?
We haven't built them into position descriptions. There are, as Lyndall said, some people who have used them as part of their goals, but that's a personal decision of those individuals. So we haven't made them kind of structurally a mandatory thing to consider, but certainly by having the conversation, and if we have the conversation year on year, that is, telling a story to our staff about what we value. But no, we haven't structurally put it into any performance plans, or unless people choose to do that themselves.
So now that you've spent 2 years mapping the goals, Are there any goals that you're particularly looking at focusing on in the future to see change? The example in the question here is around taking action to combat climate change and its impacts.
So I think we will reconsider all of the goals and look again at which ones align best with where we are now. We're probably not particularly focused on climate change, or haven't been prior to this. The university clearly as a university is, and there are a number of measures where we can contribute to what the university does, but it's something that if when we discuss that with staff, they come up with stories and examples of how we are contributing, and some of that might be, you know, open education can contribute because you're not printing books so much. You know, we have, you know, solar panels on, you know, every surface across the university practically, but there are a few things that we can look at about what we do, but I think that we would have to take lead from our staff as to whether they identify activities that we do that align with that.
And Lyndall, I know that you particularly had a focus during a recent deselection process about diverting books from landfills. So are there any other examples like that that potentially would feed into future mapping activities?
Yes, that was a big one, and I do think we were pleased to be able to contribute to the university's commitment to environmental sustainability through that after that project. But I think like most other academic libraries, number 4, quality education is a really big one. And I think that based on the work that we've done, there's a flow-on effect about developing and enhancing quality education around the UN SDGs. We've worked hard to educate and promote awareness amongst the library staff, and I think the next step is to share that more broadly so that we can engage our students, as we said, and wider part of USQ in that storytelling exercise and bring them into that journey as well.
That leads really nicely into a question around how has using the SDGs allowed the story to tell the library to tell its story to the wider university community?
Sorry, we're laughing at our 2-minute wrap up. Absent harp. Can you just ask that question again, Claire? Sorry.
So the question, Carmel, is how has using the SDGs allowed the library to tell its story to the wider university community?
So this is one of the areas where I think we could make some improvement. So there's been some communication with leaders across the university, but I don't really think that we have traction. So there's difference between communicating to people and having people understand and engage with the goals. And I think that it's really my role to make sure that we find better ways to really engage well with our leaders across a broad section of the university to really get them to understand and value what we're doing. And I think that's a bit of a thorny one, and it's quite different from just saying, here's what we mapped. I think it's a deeper conversation that needs to be had.
So just to finish up, the SDGs are part of the United Nations 2030 agenda, so that's 9 years away. What's one thing that academic libraries could do to progress the goals?
I'm just going to plug open education. Linda, what do you think?
Oh, you took my idea. We're one and the same, yes. That's synonymous with who we are, and that open education, open pedagogy, open assessment, and open text is, I think, a clear way forward, particularly, but it associates with so many of the goals. So I think that is definitely where we would focus or suggest that there is a focus.
Well, thank you very much, Carmel and Lyndall. I'll get you to imagine a virtual round of applause from the participants today, and hand back to Jo to take us to the break.
And applause for you too, Claire. Beautiful facilitation.
Thanks, Claire.
Yes. Yeah, very much agreed with that. Yeah, thanks, Claire. And also thank you to Carmel and Lyndall for providing us with all of these insights. You can see from the questions in the chat that it started us all thinking about what we measure and value around how we work and how the SDGs can creatively assist in our own libraries. We're just going to have a short break and we'll be back at 10:55 for the next round of presentations, starting with Anna from La Trobe. So I'll see you all back at in a couple of minutes. Thanks everyone. I hope that just gave you a moment to at least stretch and look away from the screen, and we'll get started again. And next up it's Anna from La Trobe University. So thanks, Anna.
Hello, can everyone hear me there?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so I'd firstly like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people whose lands I live and work on. I'm normally based at our Bundoora campus. My colleague Heather, who can't be here today, unfortunately, so I'm going to be speaking on her behalf, and she's usually based at the Bendigo campus. We both work in the Learning and Teaching Partnerships team at La Trobe, and we have a range of discipline responsibilities in the business school, humanities, social sciences, and allied health as well now. So we're going to talk a bit about how the disruption to working online due to the pandemic created opportunities for us to adapt the way we work. We did firstly ask ourselves why we're bothering to talk about this, because what we've done seems really, really minor, but we sort of thought actually it's okay during a pandemic to maybe not have amazing big ideas or pull off complicated projects. We will obviously hear quite a lot about other people's amazing projects, but we wanted to share some really small changes that we made to our practice that have had a really big and ongoing impact on the way that we're connecting with our university community. So we always say to our students that there's no silly questions, but sometimes I am afraid to ask silly questions. And this isolation that we're experiencing can breed anxiety. I'm sometimes very worried about teaching, but I'm also sometimes worried about getting things right and being seen as helpful and not being demanding of others' time. So how do I approach academics I haven't met? Who do I ask to get help with something? As the pandemic spread across the world, we scrambled to help academics move subjects online, as well as our own classes and consultations. Since then, it's been a sustained period of uncertainty, and at times that's left us feeling like we're just paddling along, keeping our heads above the water. There's been some real benefits for us working online. We feel much more connected with our library colleagues at other campuses than ever before. And I've been really privileged to work really closely with Heather, who's at a different campus, and we really hadn't spent a lot of time together until this time. This time of disruption has also meant that we needed to do things differently and quickly. The trend towards online and hybrid learning has accelerated, and it's going to continue according to all of the trend reports and higher education landscape reports. How are we going to work together? How are we going to work with academics? How will we support students in this environment? We're really lucky to be part of a supportive and flexible team, and with a workplace and culture that encourage us to take the initiative and try new ways of working. So we've sort of seen this as a time for us to experiment and try something different, and to be proactive rather than just waiting for people to come to us. In the library and in the coffee shop, we used to bump into our colleagues, academics, professional staff, and we'd build those friendly connections with people in different departments. But with all of the changes, we've lost some of those go-to people. And cold calling or emailing a stranger for help can be quite awkward. So how do we rebuild those connections online? This is a really simple thing, but there's been a few things that I wanted to fix, such as broken library links and subject learning guide templates. It's really annoying, but not really critical enough for anyone else to spend time escalating. So I used the HR org chart to identify the most likely someone, and I contact them with a brief message outlining the issue and my proposed solution. And I ask them if they can help me or refer me to whoever they think can. And this has got really great results. The responsible parties have been notified and the issues are resolved. And also subsequently, I've been contacted by the people I got in touch with who have had a library question. So it's built those connections. In recent research, Steele writes about how librarian involvement in online learning should include virtual reference services, online instruction, library-based modules, and deeper involvement in development with assessment tasks. So collaborating with academics is key to that practice, and we need to find ways to communicate and connect with all of our teaching academics. During this time, I've stopped waiting for invitations and I've started asking if I can come to academic meetings. I don't know why I didn't do this previously. I thought that they would invite me if they wanted me there, but I was given the advice, don't wait to be invited. So I asked if I could attend the business school coursework committee meeting, and now I've got a standing invitation to attend these monthly meetings and give a 10-minute library update. Other meetings as well. When an academic approaches me asking about resources for their new subject, I use this as a starting point to ask if I can come to their subject development meeting. I'm going to now speak on Heather's behalf. So Heather had a slightly different pandemic experience. She went on parental leave when we were still scrambling to move online. And when she returned, she came back to a fully online workplace that was now business as usual. With a reduced time fraction and some new discipline allocations, she had to catch up. Working at a smaller campus, she was used to seeing students and having consultations, but she noticed that this wasn't happening the way it used to. Rather than waiting for students to come to her, she decided to be proactive and try something different. How do we reach out to our students online? Oliveira states that how students perceive the support available to them is a reliable indicator and contribution to student success. And we want students to see that there is a real person in the library that can help them. So Heather decided to target core subjects in her discipline areas to offer a virtual pop-in to introduce herself. With course architecture across the university in a state of change, she composed a short informal email for head of departments. She revealed her concerns that students weren't approaching her and asked if they could identify a core subject from each level that she could pop into to say hello. It took Heather 10 minutes to write this email and send it to department heads. She went to make a cup of tea, and by the time she returned, there was already 2 responses and more to follow. These responses gave her the priority core subjects for each year level and CC'd the subject's coordinator. So with the head of department or the equivalent supporting her to attended classes, it actually resulted in really quick responses from subject coordinators to organise a time to pop in to the Zoom classes. This required no formal prep work and immediately connected her with many, many students. So working online has taken us away from those corridor conversations and coffee catch-ups, disrupted our connections and left us feeling quite a bit unsure of ourselves. We've decided to stop making things harder for ourselves and just ask people if we could join in or get help with something. We've saved ourselves time and improved our connections across campuses. What were the ripple effects? For me, identifying other professional staff who could help solve problems for the library resolved ongoing issues at the source, and it created and reinforced connections with other teams. Attending academics meetings has helped me feel part of a wider team supporting teaching and learning, because I now get updates from other areas that I can bring back and share with my colleagues. It provides a really valuable communication platform to a targeted teaching academic audience, and it allows us to build a groundswell of support for the bigger school-wide projects that we're starting to embark on this year, such as scaffolding information literacy throughout the business school. For Heather, attending virtual class pop-ins gave her an understanding of priority subjects for further targeting, and it started conversations with academics that she maybe wouldn't have talked to previously. It puts a name on the face for the library, most importantly, in online classroom for students, resulting in an increase in direct student inquiries. And academics that didn't take her up on this offer still came back and asked if she could be involved in subject development in the future, which is a real bonus for us. So a couple of tips. We learned from our experience that our academic colleagues were not going to read a really long email. We've found that being friendly, informal, and only including the most immediate information, we get better results. You also need to know your audience. This works in our institution, but if you're not sure how it's going to be received, make sure you check with a colleague. So some of the things that we've learned from this strange time in our working lives. Asking others for help has created connections with professional staff and with other academics. It's okay for us to be informal, brief, and friendly in our emails. Others will respond in kind. We're going to start identifying appropriate academic meetings and asking if we can attend. They might say no, but at least they know we're interested now. And being proactive instead of reactive has helped us to make a better use of our time. A brief question or a short interaction can be a starting point to longer conversations and collaborations. They don't need to know all the information at once, and actually, we don't either. I just want to finish quickly with a quote from an email that Heather received from a student shortly after completing the pop-up. This really made her day. It demonstrates that the informal approach resonated with a student, and she felt comfortable enough to directly email her librarian and say hello. I wasn't aware that we as outdoor education students had a librarian, so I thought that was cool. And I've got a few readings there if anyone wants to delve deeper in some of the stuff that I mentioned, but otherwise, what questions would you ask?
Yeah.
Feel free to pop them in the chat, but if you've got some questions for us, put them in the Slido and I will do my best to answer on mine and Heather's behalf.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Anna, for that. I think that is a it's a very interesting kind of thing to come back with. What questions would we ask? Are there different questions that are these useful starting points? There are other things we can think of. There are some questions in the Slido, so if we can go start with that.
Yeah.
So the top one is, have you found that you've been almost overly successful in that you've got more opportunities and projects that have come in than you can actually support, or you finding it's built more things for you?
I think it has, not more than we can manage, but it's definitely created a lot more opportunities. So instead of just sort of it being a very transactional thing, if someone sends, someone says, hey, can you help me find a textbook for this reading list? We come back with like, hey, can I come to your subject development meeting? Let's talk about other things that we can build into your subject, like information literacy. So it is creating more work for us, but I don't think that's the worst thing, because we're building those collaborations that get us into the spaces where students are, and that's really critical for us, especially when we're online. If they're not coming into the library, we need to get into the LMS. We need to be in there promoting our more general services, but also doing the really tailored services that my team focuses on with the building of information literacy skills into the curriculum.
Have you thought of also considered of how practice of asking questions and exploring those new possibilities can be expanded across the library into other areas, roles, I guess?
I think that's a really good question, and I've worked in a few different roles in the library, and I think something that when you're working, we do have a shared services area when we're working on campus, so you have a bit of that sort of, you build those connections with other professional teams and other learning support teams that have been somewhat disconnected. And I have found that me asking a question of someone, whether it's someone in education services or if it's someone in another administrative role, just kind of reminds them that the library is there and what we do. And it just gives them a connection point as well, because they'll have questions and they won't always know who to ask about those. And so I've had questions around, can I use this meeting room at the moment? What are these facilities, what facilities have you got available? And I'm able to say, oh, I can't answer that, but you can talk to this person. And that's something that's really important, and it does get lost when we're online because everyone's just sort of swimming around in their own little bowls on Zoom. But whereas when we're on campus, you know, you bump into someone in the coffee line, you walk up to the front desk and you say, hey, can you help me with this?
Right.
But yes, to answer the question, I think other people can probably ask questions of other professional staff. Like, as long as you're not overstepping your mark, as long as you're not, you know, I tend to try and ask someone that's about the same level as me. I'm not bothering the head of department with administrative questions. I'll try and find someone who's in a more organisational role. And I'm always respectful of their time, and with the knowledge that if they come back to me with a question, I'm gonna answer their question in a timely fashion as well.
Yep, great. Thanks, Anna. There are probably a few more questions that we can follow up with later, but just in terms of, I think everybody gives a bit of a virtual round of applause for Anna Finlay here. And thank you, it's really, that's great.
And thanks, yeah, I'd like to say thanks so much to Heather. I wish she'd been able to be here because we've really enjoyed working together, putting it together, and just discussing the things that we didn't realise that we were both doing kind of by ourselves. So
I think that's the other thing, that it just shows how collaboration is a really important thing. To Lisa, Louisa and Rachel from Deakin University, thank you.
Okay, hopefully everyone can see that okay.
Yep, all good, Lisa.
Perfect, thank you. So, hello everyone, and thank you, Joe, for the lovely introductions. Rachel, Louisa and I are very excited to join you all today to discuss our adventures in creativity when designing and redesigning rather, and reimagining our support for unit chairs at Deakin. So we're going to focus, of course, on our processes of transforming uncertainty into creativity and creating more attractive, usable and sustainable solutions to support our academics as well as us. So before we go any further, we would also like to pause and reflect on the meaning of place and where we are gathered today, and acknowledge the traditional custodians of these lands where we work and live. And we pay our respects to those local people and their elders, past, present and emerging. As some background to our project, for years, the Deakin Health Librarian team have designed these live workshops to support and build academic skills and self-sufficiency in creating and structuring those unit resources, particularly prior to and during the trimester. And these typically centre around common pain points, including reading lists, ebook restrictions, and streaming video use. As COVID-19 pivoted everything online and disrupted everything, we saw that it also increased the academic stress burden, jam-packed workloads, decreased staffing and destabilised jobs. And we really thought it was time to reconsider our approaches and how to make everything a bit more effective for everyone. Ironically, even before this pressure cooker bubbled over, our session had a reputation for quite low attendance, including quite high time commitments, which were often inaccessible, particularly to sessional staff, who, while sorely in need of the knowledge, were limited by set training hours and budgeting, of course. So as you can imagine, this was frustrating for both academics, who frequently requested one-on-one consultations with us to work through all these different things that they were having to work through. And often if they didn't make these consultations, we'd find that they'd create content, we'd need to come back and help them revise it anyway to make sure they comply with copyright and all linking and other areas. So it was frustrating for us as well, as we needed to organise many and often repeat consultations to cover everything that needed to be covered. So it was at this sort of crossroads of uncertainty that created a space for us to stop, reevaluate and refresh our support. And we wanted something which was really eye-catching, as well as non-threatening, embeddable, accessible anytime and anywhere, and easy to use and effective, really. So we felt it was important to target and create support which disrupted that panic tunnel vision that academics seem to get, particularly when they're planning and structuring their units. So what did this solution look like? So if you'll bear with me, I'm just going to change our screens to show you the tool itself, and hopefully that'll be popped into chat. So we've designed this asynchronous resource using H5P, and that's the course presentation tool. So it's fully cross-navigable. So if I flick on over to this, you'll see the different areas which use our inbuilt anchors to go to the sections you need, or you can, of course, do it linearly down the bottom here. The graphics, as well as being bright and inclusive, are derived from our library design system, which is a repository of reusable images and graphics and scenes and characters created by our wonderful library digital designer. And in terms of content, we targeted the common pain points. So these are reading lists, textbooks, linking to stuff, images, and other support. So sections are typically designed to be light on the cognitive load. So if I go to linking to stuff, you will see this lovely graphic with a little bit of a hook that's really common for people to come across, as well as sort of a bit more information and links off to other resources. So everything's pretty colourful and consistent, and it offers practical help as you sort of scroll through. And finally, it is open, and there is a bit of a test your knowledge section at the end. So I'm going to flick back, and feel free to go and have a bit more of a look and dig later on, or now if you so choose. But I will hand this over to my colleague Louisa to chat about the processes.
Thanks, Lisa. So the development of this module was very fast. So one early morning video catch up, we reflected on the low use of these online classes we were giving. And we threw around ideas for better ways to communicate to unit chairs and quickly decided on a direction. And we had about 2 weeks to put it in action ready for the next trimester. We tried not to overthink the process and just get on with it, which worked in our favour with such a limited time span. The idea of a standalone H5P course presentation was borrowed from previous successful projects for students. We wanted something engaging, highly focused, low on text, and fast to use. So unit chairs need to pull a lot of strings together really quickly when they're getting ready for the trimester. We needed them to think, oh, yes, this is what I need, at one of the busiest times of the year for them. So it needed to be presented as a solution, not as yet another task to do later or never. Next slide, please. The module could include not just content, but also activities to help improve staff retention. The teaching principles which we'd learnt to use on the students, we were now turning to focus on the academics. So we needed a hook for each section, that big question that gets the audience's attention. It's something relatable that says, this will answer your exact problem right now. As a tight-knit group, we were able to brainstorm these pretty quickly. Next slide. So for images and videos, we had the, can I use YouTube in my lectures as a hook? For textbooks, we have a student asking, why can't I access my ebook? For linking, another student cries, the link to the article is broken. It felt almost daring to start each section with a complaint or a problem, but these are the real world situations that unit chairs experience daily. So hopefully our module will, stand out to them as something that will help them avoid these situations. Putting these scenarios together with the library design system images was a lot of fun. It allowed for some creativity and finding ways to make the situations relatable, colourful and fun. One more slide. We also kept the quiz activities short, sweet and easy. Questions that are just designed to reinforce 2 or 3 things that we hope they remember, such as the library can digitise up to 10% or 1 chapter. You can link to articles, but don't upload the PDFs to the unit site. And if in doubt, ask a librarian. Again, these tasks should be easy for unit chairs to do, reinforcing those simple answers and the fact that we are here to help. It was a whirlwind, but and directing each other. That was super. It was a whirlwind, but with regular meetings on Zoom, directing each other where to put things on H5P, which only allows one person at a time, so we're kind of backseat driving. We managed to meet our deadline with what we think looks like a fun, easy module that our unit chairs will refer to when they need it. Rachel?
Okay, so the outcomes were that to promote this resource, it was added to the Health, Teaching and Learning News email that was sent out to all staff. So it was included as part of the library section on preparing for trimester 2. So it was sent out in June. And we also sent it out in librarian in residence email. So we also did that at the beginning of trimester 3 in October. We do still have a narrated PowerPoint video for anybody who prefers to watch something instead of working their way through this course presentation. Next slide, please. So we didn't get around to asking for feedback from staff in June when we first produced and promoted this resource because we were all too busy. But Louisa and I sent out a brief email to our schools asking for some feedback we could use in this presentation, and some of our staff replied. So here's the feedback we got. What a beautiful presentation. Library support for unit chairs H5P resource is very helpful and easy to navigate. And clear as a bell, nice work. And lots of good information in there, and it's presented in an engaging way. So moving forward, Lisa and Louisa and I have had a discussion about what we could do to improve the visibility of this resource. So we're thinking we could add it to our Deakin Libraries teaching resources page, where we usually tell our staff to go to get all the information about what they can do and help support for their teaching. So we may need to make some minor changes to make it more generic so we can suit every faculty. So thank you for listening. Are there any questions?
Yeah, yes, there are. Thanks, Lisa, Rachel, and Louisa. It's fascinating to see that's a way of reaching out to staff. I think there are kind of a couple of questions around that. So, and which I've got is. How did you have a strategy for keeping the content targeted, and how did you work out what to focus on and limit those number of hooks?
I'll take that one. So we had previously designed the unit chair preparation video session, which we ran regularly, and so we sort of knew what the things we got most asked about, and so from that we actually narrowed down. And you know, librarians like to throw everything in there, including the kitchen sink, so we just sort of paired ourselves back to, if they have to walk away knowing 2 things, what would they be, kind of approach. So that's how we chose each section and how we chose the content for each of those sections. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. Having that was actually sort of is one of the other questions, was how did you identify those pain points? So it's interesting that you had the survey.
It's like you sort of, just by talking to each other, we realize, and we also do statistics on the kind of work that we do. So we reflect each week on what kind of questions we got asked, how many TALIS e-readings list questions we got, and it's like, oh my God, it's just like everybody this week. So that kind of helps us reflect on, okay, this is a problem. And also when unit chairs come to us in the middle of a trimester going, my links don't work, it's like, you know, well, okay, that's something we should have helped you fix before the unit started. So it was kind of through experience, I guess, on the ground that we knew what to focus on.
And a question out of that, are you seeing almost a knock-on effect from that? Is there less scrambling to sort of fix things because you've got a cohort who've worked their way through the module?
It's hard to be sure. because we don't really have a strong way of measuring the interaction with the H5P and seeing who's visiting, how much they visited. But certainly we haven't had as much. Is that because it's 2021 and 2021 special, or did we just do a great job? We will see.
Yeah, it's yeah, it's I think it's sort of it's. I was going to say, should staff find that more engaging way of getting the information?
Yeah, I saw a comment there in chat about it's better than a pile of PDFs. Yeah. And hopefully better than having to call your liaison at 5:59 p.m.
Great. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for that, Louisa, Rachel, and Lisa. I think you can see great response in terms of from the chat as well. And as we're nearing the end of the event, I'm just going to pass on to Romney to bring us home for the day.
Thanks, Jo. And thanks to all of our speakers for your insightful presentations, as well as to everyone who attended and asked questions. It's your contributions that really enrich our events. As a small thank you to all of our speakers, the CRIG Seminar Committee and CAVAL have arranged for native trees to be planted through the organisation 15 Trees. If you have any further questions for today's speakers, and we know that there was a lot, you can send an email to members@caval.edu.au and Sarah will provide you with the speakers' contact details. And I believe this email address is also going to be in chat as well. I'd really like to thank my fellow CRIG Seminar Committee members. It's been another challenging 12 months, but it's been so lovely to come together and organise this year's events and have that as a focus point. So looking forward, our next CRIG Seminar event is tomorrow at 2 p.m. AEDT. So that'll kick off with Deakin University's Kat Kane and University of Wollongong's Christy Newton. They'll start the session by unpacking the concept of creativity before introducing 4 showcase presentations. So you can register through the link which has been added into chat, and we'd love to see as many of you as possible. So all that's left to say now is thank you everyone again and have a fantastic Tuesday.